What's up everybody, my name is Jesse, the Laotian Emotion, and this is my 1984 Nissan 300Z. Today, I want to get the upper intake manifold off and hopefully clean up a whole bunch of these wires in preparation for the engine coming out. Now, why would I want to take the engine out of a perfectly running vehicle? Well, this vehicle is 34 years old, and quite honestly, everything needs to get refreshened up. Hopefully, I'll be able to replace most of the gaskets on the engine and the bearings so it's working in good, proper order. So today I'll be taking off the intake manifold, the distributor, and taking and tucking away most of the wires in preparation for the engine coming out of the car. There are 5 bolts all on the top of the upper intake manifold, and they're all this 6-sided squares, hexagon socket, and I'll be taking all those out to hopefully take it off the car. Previously, I've taken off all the other accessories on the engine, such as the throttle body, that weird EGR thing, and a few of the connections on the other side. So hopefully now I'll be able to just lift it straight up on out. The next thing to take off will be the 2 fuel rails running on top of the engine, so then hopefully I can take off the distributor as well, and the spark plugs and fuel injectors will all come right out. So instead of messing with all of these clips scattered around the entire fuel system, I'm thinking it might be easier to unbolt the fuel system from each one of the screws that's attaching to the manifold and just lift the whole thing out as a whole. So now that all the screws holding the injectors in place are gone, now the whole set of injectors can really move. So now I'll be trying to take off other parts of the fuel system to hopefully lift this out of the car. So 2 bolts holding in the injectors are held under there. It actually ties it into the lower intake manifold bolt, so I'll be removing those. It turns out that other bolt is actually 12 millimeters. So now those 2 bolts are loosened and taken out. Hopefully I'll be able to move the whole fuel rail, which I am. Now unfortunately, part of the fuel rail still has to be stuck, which is this, which is the fuel pressure regulator, or what it was in the 80s, and I'll just be trying to disconnect it from the regulator and try and take it off. So I found the easiest way to do this is to actually take the wiring harness off of the injectors to really clean up most of the wiring. So I took off one off camera, and it's your standard wiring. You just pull on both sides to get it off the tab. So I unwired all the injectors. It's just one single clip you pull backwards, so I'm going to be labeling each hole and marking where they go, so when I put the engine back together, I'll be putting it back together correctly. After all that wiring is cleaned up, I'll take off the distributor and then get a lot more working room to see why this fuel rail isn't coming out. Now I'll be pulling the distributor out of the car to clear up a lot of the wiring problems this car has. There's also this main vacuum that I really just want to move and not move just quite yet to make sure everything is working already. I really don't want to disturb the vacuum lines, so I'm just going to pull the distributor and clean up all the wires to make sure I can pull this thing easily. The distributor uses one 10mm bolt in the bottom, and hopefully I can get it even though it's on an angle, so I can get it to move. And it came out real easy. This bolt isn't in super tight because the distributor can move as you set and adjust timing. The distributor is marked what cylinders are what, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I made my markings for the wires. Of course it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So just 2 different things that I'll have to worry about, but no big deal. I'll remove all 6 spark plug wires from the spark plugs and pull the distributor straight out. there's something taped or screwed into the bottom of the distributor. There's a gear on the bottom of the distributor that will turn the cap in the rotor as the engine turns. There's a camshaft in this cylinder bank that will turn this distributor gear. I'll be removing this one screw, which should be the last thing holding this distributor into the car. And thankfully it came out okay. So that wire I was doing actually supposed to stay on the distributor, so I'll just screw that back in correctly, because that comes off of this lead right here that goes in the computer. The lead I actually want is down here. That's what's actually keeping it in the car. To save myself a whole bunch of time and hassle removing this, because there's a bolt underneath that I can't really access, I'll just be removing the whole intake manifold from the car and just lift it up and out of the way. There are two hose clamps near the end where the fuel pressure will hook up to the system. I'll be removing those and then untorquing the entire lower cylinder head, lower intake manifold. You know, these two little connections really are giving me a hard time coming off. I'm thinking just temporarily I can just take off the lower intake manifold and deal with it around this instead. So the lower intake manifold comes out with these level 6 Allen keys and all these 12mm bolts. Now that all the surrounding gaskets and bolts have been taken off, I actually had to remove 2 bolts that hold this neck on. I can finally start pulling up on the lower intake manifold. So after about 15 minutes of pulling and prodding, I was finally able to lift the lower intake manifold off of the engine, and it's raw. So as I was exploring the engine bay post lower intake manifold removal, I found that it has a lot of coolant in there, so I'll have to carefully remove both of these heads in order to not get coolant everywhere. Now that the lower intake manifold is off, I'll be removing it from the vehicle and working on it outside. I'll also throw an image of the 2 valve covers off to really inspect the condition of the cam. Now that everything's all taken apart, I'll be taking some time to vacuum the area before taking off the valve covers. I'll start with the driver's side valve cover. In case it's hard to tell, this camshaft and valve train is disgusting. It is baked on carbon, crusty oil, everything. I am very surprised why this car even ran. But the VG30 is known to be very robust. Let's take off the other valve cover. Now taking off the valve cover reveals just as crusty, if not crustier, than the first one. The previous owner of this vehicle really didn't do a good job, as you can tell by the level of oil and crustiness you can see inside the entire valve train. I mean, every one of these bolts is just covered in old, crappy, crusty oil. So this engine is going to most definitely need a rebuild. A rebuild might not be justified, but it will give me peace of mind that this engine will run for a long time once I know that entirely the whole engine will be flushed of all the sludge. In the next episode, we'll be servicing the injectors and hopefully getting the engine prepared for removal. Thanks for watching.